When making a masking tape last to base a pair of shoe pattern off of, it's really best to get help from someone else to do it. But let's be realistic. Few of us are crazy enough to make our own shoes. Finding someone else who wants to help us is hard. So I'm going to do this solo. And when you do that, it's really important to make sure you have all of your materials laid out ahead of time, because you are not going anywhere until you are done. Most importantly, don't forget the scissors. Alright, so I've got here a couple plastic bags. You can use a loose sock instead. I've got my masking tape. I'm just going to do a low shoe on one foot, so I think that will be enough tape this time around. I've got a marker for marking out the design on the last, and I have my inspiration pattern over here. So that I have an idea where I want to draw my lines after I've got my foot taped up. So here we go. The technique is really simple. I just have wrapped this bag as well as I can around my foot, and I'm going to lay out one strip at a time, step on it, and then fold it inwards. And each successive piece is going to make this bag conform closer and closer to my foot. It's important to try to keep your leg straight up and down, because that changes the shape. It changes the shape of your foot when you load it with weight. So you want to be sitting in a low chair, leaning slightly forward, with your leg straight up, some weight down on it. And we'll just keep going. So I've got the instep done here, just the first layer. We'll add more integrity to it later. And moving on to the heel, which is rather tricky. I'm going to be doing strips around the bottom of my foot and around the back of my foot to pull this all inwards. One reason why it's good to get help doing this is that sometimes there are certain angles that are just hard to see on your own foot. I've gotten the inside of the ankle done pretty well, but the outside is still greatly lacking. So I'm almost done with this piece. I cut off the extra bag just so I could see what I was doing instead of it flopping down around. I've got 2 layers of tape over most of it. There's still a few places they're kind of squishy. You want it to be somewhat hard. A couple layers of tape at least, preferably in 2 different directions, wherever the contour of the foot allows for that. So I'm going to put a few more strips around the toe area there and around the ankle where I'm going to cut off the top of the design. And then I think this will be ready to cut out. One last check to do before you start tracing your design is to actually stand up in it and move forward and make sure that your toes have enough room and you didn't pull too tight on that tape anywhere. It should feel like a really snug and sweaty sock. That plastic doesn't breathe too well. But go ahead and roll your foot around, roll up onto your toes, back onto your heel. And just make sure that it fits you correctly, because this is going to be the basis of the fit of your shoe. So I've started my design, just tracing a sole line. I have 2 different sole lines that I've traced. One, I took my marker mostly vertically around my foot, which is where you would want the actual insole of a shoe to be. And the second line, I held the marker horizontally and traced where the edge of my foot contacts the ground. And you can see that's quite a ways in from vertical tracing. So next I need to figure out where those vamp edges go. It seems I have made a somewhat annoying mistake on this design exercise because I molded my left foot and the pattern I was going to transfer ideas from is of a right foot. But these diamond shapes that I'm looking for do seem to be symmetrical, so I'm just going to line up my heel with the back and transfer them anyway. Now comes the part where we're really winging it. I made these index marks to line up with the diamonds on the pattern, and that comes right across the instep of my foot, which does not seem to line up with where that seam line is on the actual moccasin. It looks like the moccasin vamp comes all the way back to where the front of the leg is, right here. So I'm going to start winging it and putting in lines. So one of the main characteristics of this design is that the sole comes up and wraps around the foot slightly, but it doesn't come in as far as like a pucker toe moccasin. So I started out tracing a line an even distance from the floor around my foot, and trying to make it level with the top of my toes, which seems to be what's going on here. That comes up the front of the toe and then it stays vertical and does not dive back in. All that is adjustable later on when we get to the actual pattern. And it was hard to see where exactly the seams are here, but we know that the heel part is mostly vertical on the sides, and so I drew that line just down the side of my ankle here. Pay attention to where your ankle bones are. You don't want a seam right on top of them, and you want the tie to be above your ankle bones. So if you watched my other video on tools and materials and saw the professionally made pattern, they drew a circle here where the ankle bone is so that the artisan doing the final pattern could see where that is. So we have our vamp, we have our sole, and we have our heel. Now it's time to cut myself free. So I just cut on my pattern lines until I could get my foot free, and I pulled out some of the extra layers of plastic and trimmed those off. And now I need to finish cutting out my 3 pattern pieces. So now these are starting to look like pattern pieces. I marked which way is up on the heel piece here. And here's my vamp, which is turning out rather different than the original, which confuses me. The original looks like it has a big tongue here that I don't see on the diagram. Maybe I should make a pair out of fabric just to see how the design goes together, and maybe rethink my pattern cutting here. This is a pucker design, so this piece is very three-dimensional. We're going to have to slice it to get a flat pattern. So I went ahead and sliced the edge of my mold, every place where I expect the pattern to have to pucker, and I traced out my pieces onto just ordinary scrapbooking paper, just because the 12 by 12 is a nice size to work with for making shoes. I've got a lot of cleanup left to do. Period shoes, historically accurate shoes, are symmetrical. There's no right and left. So the one thing I'm going to do is straighten up these curves a little bit, make it a little more symmetrical. I'm also going to bump out the toe a little bit to make this curve easier to cut and sew. I'm going to pay attention to this pattern here and straighten out this line a bit. and trace on here where the insole will go. I think I definitely did change the, where's the heel, size 7, there we go. I definitely did do my sidelines in a different place than on theirs. This is much wider. I think perhaps it was intended that the cut angle up rather than being vertical. But we shall see how it goes. I think the leather I want to use is kind of pricey, so I think we're going to make a fabric pair and make adjustments as we go. So I've smoothed out the pattern a little bit, tried to make it a little bit more symmetrical. I added a seam allowance here where this is going to tuck down into the sole, and where this is going to tuck down into the sole, and where it's going to meet the vamp. So now I need to cut these out and fold them in half to see how symmetrical they really are. And this one obviously needs a little bit more symmetry. And then I will draw my final patterns. So here we have our final pieces. I've labeled all of them with the name of the person the pattern is for, the year it was made, the name of the pattern. I always start with a number because there's inevitably going to be revisions to this later on. And this is a left-right pattern. It is not specific to a specific foot, so I've noted that as well. I made some vague lines where the stitch lines are going to be in, just as a hint to myself later. I did not make a pattern piece for the fringe section because that's just really easy to, it's just a square. So I'm not going to worry about that. I am slightly worried about the fit of this being a little too snug around the ankle to get on. We shall see how that goes. You may also note that I added a small tongue to this, which is consistent with the pattern over there, although it doesn't look consistent with the picture of the finished boot. But it's nice to have a little tongue to put under your lace tie there. So we'll give that a try. Alright, so I think it's time to cut out a fabric version and sew that up and see how it goes.